All right, welcome to this explainer. Today we're getting right into the absolute mechanics of legal interpretation. If you've ever wondered exactly how judges solve complex legal mysteries when the law itself is frankly confusing or ambiguous, well, they actually act a lot like detectives, using a very specific set of internal clues. So in this explainer, we're going to open up that detective's toolkit and look specifically at how courts decode one of the most important contextual tools of all, statutory titles. Here is our roadmap for today. 1. The statutory ambiguity puzzle. 2. Short versus long titles. 3. Contextual overrides and limits. 4. The legal case files. And 5. Your practical interpretation guide. Let's get into it. Section 1. The statutory ambiguity puzzle. Finding clues inside the law. Okay, so picture this. You're faced with a legal mystery. A specific section of a law is vague, poorly worded, or maybe has a glaring loophole. Judges don't just guess what the lawmakers meant, right? They first turn to what we call internal aids. These are literally the physical components baked right into the statute itself. The whole goal here is to resolve ambiguities without having to look outside the document to find the legal meaning or the true intention of the legislature. It is all about finding the answers hidden right there within the four corners of the page. Section 2. Short versus long titles. Labels versus magnifying glasses. So every piece of legislation generally has two very distinct titles, and you really need to know the difference. The short title is basically just a handy file label. Think of the Indian Penal Code, 1860, or just IPC, 1860. It's great for identification and quick citation, but as legal precedent tells us over and over, it carries very little weight and is absolutely not a useful aid for actual legal construction or interpretation. You cannot use it to restrict or expand the meaning of a provision. But then on the other hand, we have the long title. This is traditionally considered part of the enactment itself. It's a substantive, heavy-lifting header that explains the scope, general purpose, and exact intent of the law. Let's look a little closer at the long title. You should really treat this as your North Star when you're navigating a tricky law. It's a highly descriptive header stating exactly what the act aims to achieve, whether that is to amend existing laws, consolidate various rules, or define entirely new legal concepts. Because it explicitly outlines the scope of the law, it acts like a key to unlock the broader purpose of the statute. In fact, under the mischief rule, courts frequently invoke the long title to determine the exact gap in the law that the statute was beautifully designed to fill. Just look at the new criminal code as a perfect example of this. The short title is simply BNS 2023. Honestly, that tells you almost nothing about what's actually inside. But read the long title right below it. An act to consolidate and amend the provisions relating to offenses and for matters connect therewith or incidental to thereto. Suddenly, you've got a massive magnifying glass over the legislation's true intent. It confirms the exact scope for the judge. Section 3. Contextual overrides and limits. The rule of precedence. Now, as powerful as the long title is, we have to talk about its limits. Take a look at this foundational principle from the case of R.V. Bates. It lays out that the title, while a part of the act, is not an enacting provision in itself. So what does that actually mean for us? It means that while the long title is incredibly useful if a specific section is ambiguous, it is completely ineffective to control or change the clear, plain meaning of the text. Basically, a judge cannot use the long title to magically rewrite a clear, unambiguous law just because the title implies something slightly different. To quickly summarize these rules of precedence for you, yes, the long title is a vital part of the statute, and absolutely, courts use it to fill gaps and resolve ambiguity. However, it is fundamentally subordinate to plain, unambiguous language. As Chief Justice Patanjali noted in a famous ruling, internal aids like the long title cannot be used to narrow down or restrict clear operative text. If the text of a section is perfectly precise, the plain text always wins out. Section 4. The legal case files. Titles in the courtroom. Looking at past jurisprudence really helps clarify how this works in practice. In the 1952 Ashwini Kumar Ghose case, the court had to decide if Supreme Court advocates could both file and plead cases. Even though the title of the 1951 Act seemed a bit restrictive, the majority held that the plain text of Section 2 clearly gave them the right to practice fully. The text overrode the title. But then look at the Poppet Law case at the bottom. Here, the long title was successfully applied to confirm that the 1939 Sales Tax Act was specifically intended only for the Madras province. It resolved a geographical ambiguity perfectly, aligning the interpretation with the spirit of the legislation. Let's actually zoom in on that Manohar Lal case in Punjab because it is fascinating.
A shopkeeper was convicted under the Punjab Trade Employees Act of 1940 for keeping his shop open on a mandated closing day. The shopkeeper went to court and argued, hey, the long title literally says this act is to limit the hours of shop assistants and employees. I am the owner working entirely alone. He really thought he had found a brilliant loophole using the long title to limit the law's scope. But the court completely disagreed. They ruled that the plain text of Section 7.1 mandated closure to protect the health of all workers as part of the community, which applied even to the hardworking owner. The clear operative text completely took precedence over his long title defense.
Section 5, Your Practical Interpretation Guide, the 3-Step Strategy. So, when you are tasked with interpreting a vague or complex section of a statute, you can simply follow this 3-step strategy. Step 1, read the long title. Identify the explicit purpose and the exact mischief the lawmakers wanted to fix. Treat it as your North Star. Step 2, harmonize. Look at the ambiguous text and try to construct an interpretation that aligns perfectly with that broader purpose. And finally, Step 3, check for conflict. You must always double-check that your new interpretation doesn't create an absurdity or fight the plain, literal wording of the section. Just remember that shopkeeper in Punjab. As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with this final, provocative puzzle to think about. If you are ever reading a law and you find a glaring, undeniable contradiction between the crystal-clear, plain text of a section and the noble goals outlined in the long title, which tool in your detective's kit will you trust to crack the case? Keep that rule of precedence in mind. Thanks for joining me today, and keep looking for those internal clues.